climate, environment, and many other things as well. And I want to put on record enormous thanks to the Blueprint Coalition for organising today's webinar. The coalition brings together local government professionals, charities, civil society, environmental groups, and climate research institutions to promote practical solutions that we hope will help unlock local climate action by councils and other partners, and identify where national government can be doing its best to support local authorities with delivery. And huge thank you to Peter, who is one of the co-hosts for the meeting and also a member of my team here at the council. Just very briefly, today's webinar we think is timely. It's an opportunity to discuss that issue of the national target of net zero emissions by 2050, and looking at local targets that many councils have entered into in advance of this date. The deadlines that we have set ourselves for that are drawing closer by the day. So the aim of today's event is twofold. One, to try and stimulate debate about the merits of a statutory duty, which the LGA is consulting on at the moment, or potentially broader duties for local authorities to take action on climate, and the conditions that are necessary for this for such a duty to be successful. And secondly, to encourage participation in the LGA consultation process that I just identified, and then any subsequent debates and discussions on the issue. I'm delighted that we have a eminent selection of speakers who've been assembled here today to share their thoughts from national, local, and civil society perspectives. So you don't want to hear from me. What you might want to do is hear from the Blueprint Coalition, and Isaac's put more about them in the chat. But we've got and we'll start with our three speakers. First up is Eamon Lally, who is runs the LINS team at the Local Government Association. So Eamon, come on in.
Thank you very much, Adam, for the introduction. Yes, so as Adam says, part of the reason for this meeting today is to think about duties on local government. And we know that climate change is still of major interest to communities. We know that from our own recent surveying and surveying by many others. We know also that local government is key to the success of climate action, having an impact on over 80% of the area's emissions. But generally, local government action is often hampered by lack of clarity, certainty, resources, and the powers and responsibilities to deliver against what is an enormous challenge. So through the LINS, for the LGA, through the LINS board, which is chaired by Adam, we made the commitment to explore options around duties at the end of last year. And subsequently, we published a consultation on possible legal obligations. Now, that's published in April, and it concludes very precisely at 11:45 p.m. on the 30th of May. And for those of you, hopefully you've had an opportunity to see it and are already busy completing it. But if you haven't, and this is the first time you've heard about it, then I've put a link into this chat so that you'll be able to see it as well. So it's asking for views on options, opportunities, risks and barriers, and what legal requirements might look like as well. So we are asking respondents to consider the value of a duty or duties, and we're asking for comments on the various approaches. So the duties could be a simple general duty to have regard to certain objectives or targets, or be more specific about council responsibilities around services, plans, and the way it operates. There are also very different options for this. So we could have primary or secondary legislation or statutory guidance. And there are likely to be advantages and disadvantages of different approaches, and we'd like to hear more about your views on those options. So as I said, the consultation guides you through questions on the approaches to applying duties. It looks at, suggests or asks you for your views on statutory, secondary legislation, legislative guidance, as I've said, but also on other options like outcomes frameworks and contractual arrangements, which might be substitutes for statutory requirements. It also recognises that we're in a time of flux So it asks respondents to think about devolution and the distribution of duties across strategic and constituent authorities. And it asks about the implications of LGR for any duties that might be placed on local authorities at whatever level. It's also really keen to understand where respondents are in terms of placing duties on other public bodies and or on the partnerships that are developed locally across the public sector. So a range of issues to be addressed there. I think that it's worth saying that a number of organisations are already very keen on the idea of a duty, including London councils and Adept and others. When we were looking at this as a LINS board, the board were very keen on the idea of a duty and wanted to pursue options, but only wanted to do it in a way which would make sense for local government and for the country more generally. And so one of the areas that I think also the consultation asks questions of is around the relationship between a duty on local authorities and also a requirement on government to fund those duties as well, and sees that as being an important issue to get some views from respondents on. So I know I only had 5 minutes. All I wanted to do really was to set out what the process of the consultation was and the issues that it was focusing in on, and hopefully that sets up the basis for some discussion as well in today's session. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Eamon. And yeah, that's absolutely right. There is a very clear support from the LGA for the principle of a statutory duty as set out in the LINS decision a couple of months ago. But it's absolutely crucial to put detail behind what that means, and that's why this consultation is so important, because it can mean all sorts of things to different people, and we want to make sure that whatever comes out this process is something that we can say to the government could be realistically delivered and would actually make sure that it helps bring resources necessary to meet the duties, and that's the debate that we're having at the moment. So thank you very much for kicking us off there, Eamon. Now, looking for the national perspective, we go to Louise Marix-Evans. Louise, from
thank you.
Strategy.
Thanks, Adam, and thanks to Blueprint for asking me along today. Probably here, I work a lot with local authorities, quantum strategy and technology, and I work on community energy and innovation projects within local authorities. But I'm probably here because in 2020 I wrote the report for Climate Change Committee on local authorities and the sixth carbon budget, and mapped out what that means. And I was horrified to discover that, of course, it doesn't fit together very well between national and local. And spent about 6 months trying to work that out before I realised it doesn't. So yeah, that's me. Hello. So what I thought I'd do is quickly pick up on past, present, and future to sort of address this. I mean, local authorities have had a very long-standing role in environment and place, air quality, public health, energy, municipal energy companies, with sort of going back to the old days of gas streetlights, and housing and green space and parks and so on, and then in climate change. So you can map that back to 18 something. But we had in 1992, after the Rio summit, we had Agenda 21, which some of you with grey hair might remember. Then in 2000, we had the Nottingham Declaration, where local authorities made climate declarations, and that pushed a lot of action. In 2008, we had the Covenant of Mayors, which gave you a framework to work within. And then, of course, after Paris, we had through sort of 2018, 1920, the raft of climate emergency declarations and subsequent plans. So we know that we can almost create our own duties or push ourselves as a sector. We had national indicators for some time, which again helped create a framework and some obligation and some reporting, which again pushed and enabled action on climate change within local authorities. And we see a duty in Scotland, and in fact that the supporting statutory guidance for public bodies in putting climate change duties into practice is out for consultation at the moment. And I'd say have a look at that, because it makes an interesting read and brings to life how it works in Scotland and how they want to improve it. So that's the past. This is not new, and you're all doing a lot of action. But to the present, it doesn't hang together logically. And like the title of the webinar says, should it be left to chance? And I'd argue it shouldn't be left to chance, because you have got strong duties to deliver a lot of other things. It can drop to the bottom in times of stress. It shouldn't have to rely on politicians or the sort of charismatic leadership or championship of people. It should be taken as read that we will do everything we can to reduce our emissions, save energy, adapt to climate change and build resilience, and do that in a sustainable way that also protects nature. So I think as we move, we've got 25 years left to get to 2050, where we need to be at net zero and well adapted. And at that, increasingly, the action has to be taken at that local level, looking at the way we heat our homes, the way we travel. And some of those things have got quite a long runway. So they need planning now and installing now to have an impact later. That would include tree planting. It would include our grid and our energy planning, how we build our homes now and how we retrofit our houses, plus all the co-benefits that go with that, which need communicating strongly. So local authorities are doing a lot, but it is within this fragmented policy environment and without a duty in England. And, you know, it shouldn't take something this big, like a phone book of a list of powers you've got. That's the UK 100, and I'm on Cllr, sorry about that. It shouldn't take that kind of phone book worth of instructions to go, oh, we are allowed to do this. We could use this to try and achieve it. So, yeah, that takes me, I suppose, to the future is, should there be a duty? I would say yes. I've just been speaking with people today who work at a national level who would say, yes, there should be a duty. Government's obviously watching and thinking, how much will it cost? Might it slow us down? I think there's a concern it could cause delay while it's set up. It perhaps could restrict your action that you're doing now. It could become bureaucratic or ineffective. And we did have a biodiversity duty in place since 1995, which really, frankly, I don't think achieved much. It's been strengthened now under the Environment Act. So if you had one, it needs to be a good one. So I'd see it should be an enabler, and it should drive action, not drive just reporting. And I think, rather like the Scotland one, a duty to calculate the impact on your emissions of all of your activities, whether that be your own emissions, your policy, your partnerships, a duty to adapt and build in resilience, critically design for a just and inclusive and economically and socially fair transition, so that everybody's brought with and prioritised, so no one's left behind, which is the danger at the moment. Is to act, you've either got to be very poor or very rich, potentially. And it should incorporate those other things which this touches on and relies on, which is nature and our resources. And I'd suggest it would consist of a co-created set of guidance or frameworks around planning, reporting, audit, but learning, and it should be agile, funded, resourced, integrated. And I'd say it should probably include all of the public sector, because you work so hand in glove together with the NHS, with Highways England or National Highways, with, you know, with those other partners, that if everybody was pushing in the same direction, it should be easier to achieve. So I think that's my 5 minutes, Adam. So yeah.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Louise. And before we move on any further, I have been very remiss in not really telling you how the next phase of the discussion will go. We want to hear from Victoria in a minute. Unfortunately, Cllr were not able to send anyone, but we do want to hear from you about your questions. So if you can please put your questions in the chat, Isaac from the team will help pull out those gems and put them in a document that we'll then take into the Q&A session, because rather than having lots of different people speaking, that makes it a lot easier for us. So please do get putting your questions in the chat so we can have a good Q&A session in a minute. But without further ado, I'd love to hear from the civil society's perspective, which is Victoria Marsom, who is head of England at Friends of the Air. So we look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks very much, Adam. It's really great to be with you all this afternoon. Thank you so much for inviting me to join this panel. And yes, I am head of the England team at Friends of the Earth. My team work with our network of local groups all across England. But actually, I speak also for somebody who has experience working in local government. Previously, I was head of the Leaders Office at Liverpool City Council, and I was political assistant to the elected mayor of Watford. And I think both of those perspectives, joined with my experience working at Friends of the Earth and campaigning, really can give a unique opportunity to build these, to have a look at this question, which is utterly fascinating. And I've really enjoyed listening to Eamon and Louise. Friends of the Earth strongly agree with the LGA that any coherent and deliverable plan to act on climate change relies on local delivery. And we have been calling for the statutory climate duty on local government, but supported very clearly by sufficient resourcing for several years now. And it's a key ask in our big climate campaign. We're calling for a statutory duty on all levels of local government to contribute to national and international climate targets and adaptation plans. And for this to be set out clearly in a revised national climate strategy for the UK, with progress monitored by the Climate Change Committee. Our legal victory in May 2024 required the government to produce a new climate plan, and that is now due at the end of October this year, unless, of course, the government requests and is permitted by the judge another extension. At Friends of the Earth, we've got first-hand experience of the need for stronger statutory obligations on councils and combined authorities from our grassroots local action groups all across the country, who regularly come up, unfortunately, against those barriers to local delivery of climate action. These arise even where there is deep political will and commitment from officers to act on climate, and where we can point to examples of good practice to be followed. But overall, no council or combined authority is acting at the scale that is now urgently needed. And it's increasingly clear that even with a committed council, cuts to budgets will hit those areas where there is no statutory duty. To give you an example, I live in Birmingham. Even those who aren't close to most local government funding challenges are aware of the cuts being made to services here in this city, including statutory ones, due to the financial crisis a council is in. And then we go to councils or combined authorities where there isn't a political will to act. After May's local and mayoral elections, Friends of the Earth has even greater concern. In areas where Reform are elected, they're already threatening to cut climate action. A duty will be crucial to ensure that any progress already made does not slide backwards. We don't believe that recent election results demonstrate that residents in those council areas don't want better insulated homes for themselves and their neighbours, or better bus services, both of which are crucial for tackling the climate crisis. The experience of our campaigners is also evidenced in the work done by Climate Emergency UK on council scorecards, they'll be coming again out soon, which show massive variation in the delivery of climate commitments across the country, and despite over 80% of councils having a climate plan in place. And given this experience of patchy progress, it is not surprising that several networks of community groups have identified a statutory duty as a solution. South East Climate Alliance, which includes several Friends of the Earth groups, Hampshire Climate Action, and many other climate networks have called for statutory duties on climate and nature to be included in the English Devolution Bill. And this bill offers, in our view, a unique and vital opportunity to ensure that existing and new strategic authorities are given a duty to act, but one that is securely embedded in these government reforms. So there is a lack of clarity and consistency in the way that existing devolution deals address environmental goals. Even the new Trailblazer deals, which set out an outcomes-based approach linked to the granting of a single settlement, there are no clear overarching net zero or biodiversity outcomes required. And we feel a duty to act on climate cannot operate separately to the other duties already proposed in the devolution white paper, including duties to produce a local growth plan and a spatial development strategy. Climate and nature must be at the heart of local growth plans to ensure a fair transition to a low carbon economy with high quality green jobs. But currently, growth plans are being produced without proper alignment with climate targets. Planning is also fundamental to delivering on climate targets, and that's why Friends of the Earth has supported amendments to the Planning and Infrastructure Bill that would properly align planning with the Climate Change Act 2008 and Environmental Act 2021. It makes no sense that homes are being built today that will need retrofitting in the future, or that local authorities that are trying to be the most ambitious with net zero housing requirements are hamstrung by national guidance and developer appeals. But there are many risks we completely recognise to the introduction of a statutory duty. There's a risk that a duty is imposed without adequate resourcing. At Friends of the Earth, we are very clear that a statutory duty will not work unless it's backed by adequate, stable, long-term funding to local government. We have seen how stop-start competitive funding has failed to enable action on climate or nature. There's a risk that local government won't be supported by guidance and sufficient expertise. There's a risk that local governments act on a duty without taking the community with them. Councils and combined authorities will only succeed if they take forward action on climate mitigation and adaptation with genuine engagement from their communities. There's a risk that any duty is weak or too vague. And experience has shown that vague duty to protect biodiversity is too easily overridden by the drive to build more houses instead of ensuring that new developments protect nature and give residents in those new homes access to quality green space once they're living in them. And finally, the duty should also be linked to specific targets under the Climate Change Act 2008 and the Environmental Act 2021, give more clarity to councils and combined authorities. This would enable transparent benchmarks to track progress, improving reporting on that vital climate and nature action.
Thank you very, very much for that, Victoria. Okay, so we've got some questions coming through, and I will try and bring them up now. I think just lots of really interesting different perspectives. And I think obviously we are in constantly evolving political times. But I think it is, when we're thinking about the local perspective, is we have had legally binding national level climate targets for some time. And we have a very clear roadmap. So we're very clear that delivering on those climate targets can't be met without the involvement of the local. And yeah, I think it's just trying to look at that's the thing. Yeah, obviously you've got the national missions that have again re-embedded climate action as a central goal of the government. So it is very clear about how do we make sure that local government can sort of more formalise and be both ensure that it will play its part more cohesively, but also make sure that the government just doesn't see it as an afterthought or ask our local councils to do things to meet those national level priorities without bringing adequate resource. So I will now go to questions. So we've got a couple already. So one, just talking through about that structure of government from Peter Moore. Do the panel think that the English devolution process presents an opportunity to drive forward more action on climate change by making it a mandatory element of every Devo deal going forward? We've got from Stephen Inch. How would we ensure that a new duty would not limit the council's ability to use the existing range of powers that can be deployed to tackle climate change? And then there is one from Andrew Malafant, looking at the Welsh experience. Does anyone have any knowledge of the Future Generations Act, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in Wales in 2015, in terms of how this is impacting and what it's cost at a Welsh government level? Then I've got a couple of other questions that come in. We'll pick up in the next round of questions. Does anyone want to come back on any of those from our panel? Louise.
I was happy to bounce in when there's a bit of silence. A devolution. Yeah, I think it's an opportunity, but as Victoria said, we've had different kind of devolution deals in setting up the combined authority. So some have got spatial planning powers, which are statutory, some don't. So that I don't like that myself. I think it's better if they've all got the same sort of powers and the same duties, because otherwise you live somewhere and you get a different deal to somewhere else, you end up in a postcode lottery situation. So that's one thing. And it's probably harder for Whitehall officials to deal with, to be honest, too. So that's not to take away for the fact that we know local areas are different and need different things. But I'd say that beyond them to interpret what is right for their area. So where you might have outcomes. So I'd say under any devolution deal, it would sort of say you are expected to deliver a bunch of stuff that's in line with net zero 2050. If you want to go earlier, fill your boots, because we've got some carbon budgets to meet. So share your lessons. So I would sort of oblige that and be willing to give them some longer term, low interest loans to enable that to happen. So and of course, everything we build should be well adapted. So I think strengthening that be important, but without saying, if Surrey were to do this, now no one wants to build houses in Surrey because they're going to have stronger standards. So you immediately get yourself in a pickle if you don't have a kind of a national blanket kind of expectation. And then you have the risk of leaving other areas behind, perhaps that aren't evolving as faster. So you end up in a backwater where nothing happens and you're still stuck, using a pump and going everywhere on a donkey. So that's my thought on devolution. Do you want me to power on through the others, Adam?
Yeah, please. I'm going to ask them in batches of 3, ideally. So
okay,
yeah,
so I'll pick up the others, and then other people can argue.
Yeah, not everyone has to respond to every
yeah,
other,
sure.
but respond to which bits feel right for you.
The limiting of existing powers, I'd suggest it wouldn't, because local authorities have got the powers to do anything they like as long as they're not already illegal for local authorities to do. So you do actually have the power to do what you want to. So I'd suggest the duty is sort of setting a minimum, sort of to rise everybody up to, in that it would set a minimum of what needed doing, or a set of principles by which those things should be done, rather than say, well, just because you now have a climate duty, it means you can't do X, Y, and Z or go faster, because some areas will have to go faster. So I'd suggest that it should be written in such a way it wouldn't limit, so that the planning inspector couldn't hold you back, for example. And the Welsh experience, from what I hear from Welsh local authorities, they use the Future Wellbeing of Generations Act to justify and make sure that they are thinking ahead in a way of what it means for the next generation, which is one of the principles of sustainable development under those Brundtland principles, which we might have all done in geography O-level. And I found a little audit report, which I'll share with you in the chat. It didn't create the system change as hoped, but it certainly has given a framework for thinking. And I think that's a really important one, because the action needed now will often pay back in 10 years. It will have a longer payback period than perhaps what we've got used to in terms of what we hope for, seeing immediate results. So for some things, it'll clean the air really quickly, and for some things, it'll save money really quickly. And for other things, we'll see those benefits in 10 years' time. So I think that looking at that experience and learning from what worked well in it and what didn't work well, and the same with the Scottish experience, be really important.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Louise. I see Eamon's got his hand up.
Just very quickly, a couple of points. On the first issue, I think in terms of devolution, I think our view as the LJ is that perhaps we work towards a minimum set of functions that get devolved, and then on top of that, further negotiation takes place around specifics. So within that minimum set of requirements, you could place climate action and climate activities, if there's a general agreement on that. On whether the a duty would minimize activity, I think there might not be a risk in this case, but it's just in general principle. There is an issue about the extent to which, once you've set a duty and once you set a budget to that duty, then that's as far as anybody goes, and there isn't an incentive to go beyond that. And I think that that certainly would be the case. I think if you were to bring in ring fencing of finances that related to net zero action, that would set a cap, I think, on what everyone was prepared to spend. So there are just some issues there that we're picking up in other aspects of local government work, which probably is just worth thinking about as we go down this route. That's
really interesting, Eamon, about the ring fence. I'll come back to it because I have some thoughts. Victoria.
No, I was going to say, if you want to carry on with your thoughts, Adam.
No, it's all right.
Because I think I'm more going to kind of say how much I agree with my fellow panelists, really. I think they're really thoughtful aspects. I would say very much from the perspective that the competitive funding aspects between the different mayoral combined authority areas has been really challenging to see progress being made. And then the differential in powers is very confusing. And if it's confusing on our side, then it must also, I can only imagine it's very confusing from a civil servant perspective too. because it certainly is for the residents who live in different areas and can see that also the get frustrated at the lack of progress in different areas of rail authorities. And we're trying to build up more peer-to-peer communication across our different areas as we encourage our activists to stand up for what they believe in and see it getting delivered. And it can be enormously difficult to see that because of these different powers. I think there is a risk, though, in the second question. I won't speak on Wales as I drive covering England. You need one of my colleagues to answer that, and I'm sure she'd be able to do it very well, actually. We don't want to be spending all our time just answering the council officers just answering questions and documents. We actually want them to be out there doing real work. So getting that balance correct between the statutory duty, making it a priority for climate and nature action to be delivered, but not a priority just to fill in the paperwork. And certainly one of the worst things that would happen would be for it to be a limit, a target to become a limit rather than an ambition to raise impact even further, which can only raise ambitions wider across the whole country, I would hope. So I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks, Victoria. And just coming back to the thing around how you provide support, I suppose, direct financial support to councils that Eamon raised. I think one of the challenges, and that does depend on some of the answers to the next questions we're going to be having around the particular options. But I think the way in which you can help respond to the climate crisis can be so broad in terms of tracking how that money flows through a particular system would be incredibly challenging to do. I think what I would be mindful, obviously, there are certain other areas, say, for example, rough sleeping funding or homelessness funding, where we have that money is hypothecated for that delivery thing, but that doesn't mean that's the only money that councils spend on those functions. So I think it's more to understand that if you were to say a duty imposes X amount, it comes with X amount of financial resources, looking at which every local authority is different and what the things they need to do to maximize climate action will differ in different places. So I think having that flexibility is key. So now to the next set of questions, one of which involves so Ariane Crampton's question talks about the LGA consultation itself, which sets out different options for a statutory duty in questions 6 to 11 of the survey. What are the pros and cons of each of these? Now, I'm wondering whether there is a way for Isaac to throw those questions up on screen so people can see them. I can read them out to you, but it'd probably be a better thing for people if they're up on screen. If that's not possible, I will read them out in a minute.
I will get them off as soon as possible, Councillor Hugg. If you move on to the next part.
No, I will move on to the other questions. That's all good. So Dan Stone from the Centre for Sustainable Energy talked about having experienced duty to cooperate, which was in place within the planning system and in his view didn't really work. Do others agree that creating frameworks for collaborative working will be more important than duty? You can't force people to collaborate. And then the next one from John Bell, who'd be interested in thoughts about how national targets can be broken down to apply locally, or how local targets can be understood and combined to confirm that they meet the NDCs. So does anyone want to have a crack at any of those? I mean, Eamon, you can start, because I'm sure you have yes, you have these questions committed to memory, but they're now up on screen. You're muted.
Thank you, Adam. Yes, so the pros and cons, I suppose the first thing to say is that we're hoping that everybody here online and everyone who responds to the consultation will allow us to gauge what the various pros and cons of these approaches might be. So I don't think it's necessarily for the LGA to have a complete view on this yet. We're genuinely in a process of wanting to understand from everybody what they think the pros and cons are. I suppose there are obviously differences in how these will be applied. So a general duty, which makes a very broad statement, could generally cover everything, but then falls down potentially on its implementation. And people could find ways of misunderstanding or not understanding or swerving around it. when it becomes much more specific on a particular service, that you must do this within this service, within a given time frame, then you might get action on that, but it might miss some other important aspects that you're not being compelled to do. So it is it's much more specific, but potentially smaller scale, and might not deliver on what you're seeking to achieve. Whether it sits in primary, secondary, or statutory guidance is important as well, because finding the time for primary legislation is obviously very difficult. So attaching it to secondary legislation, which might already be part of an existing bill, might be an easier way to go on, or as an addendum to an existing act might be an easier way to go, or statutory guidance might well be another easier route, and would allow a much greater explanation of what's expected under the legislation. And I think you would probably expect some statutory guidance to come anyway as a helpful guide to any legislative change that might be implemented around the duty. But I don't think we should forget some of those other issues. So there's some talk around outcomes frameworks in the discussions that have gone on around combined authorities and mayoral combined authorities, and also the kind of contractual arrangements that can be put in place that will give you this money if you deliver X amount of change around climate change, which can be a quasi-contractual arrangement with government. So there are other options. I think the kind of I don't know, the quadrants that I would measure these on were the difference between being very high level to being very specific, versus being really implementable to versus being ambitious. So I think they're some of the things we have to take into account when we're thinking about this, and it does bring into question some of these sort of other points as well, about collaboration and partnership working at the local level, and how you really bring that about. Because even though local authorities are hugely important in the delivery, they can't do this all on their own. And I think it's really important that there's strong collaborative working. You probably can't force it, but it does need to come from the top then. So if MHCLG or the Treasury or DESNES are giving a duty to local governments around climate change, perhaps there needs to be something coming down an NHS line as well, and down the other lines of key service deliverers at the local level, public service deliverers at the local level, so that there's a commonality there of the expectations around local public bodies to deliver on some of this thing. I'll stop there, but as the most important point is we're really keen to hear from you about what you think the opportunities and barriers are.
Yeah, we want to know from you what the pros and cons are, so that we can take that on board. But thanks, Eamon. Victoria, do you want to go next on either of those three?
Sure. I mean, I do think I agree very strongly with what Eamon was describing there about collaboration across, and not just local councils needing to be delivering this alone. But that's also why I feel actually working across council boundaries with each other is going to be really key. And in particular, the question around national targets being broken down, I think, obviously it's going to be key to examine. And every area is so different across the country. What we might have to tackle in Birmingham is going to be really different from what they need to tackle in Devon, which is where I grew up. Notwithstanding the fact that they've got massive coastline, and we don't in Birmingham, just the canals. But there's lots of really interesting points being made about green jobs in the chat. And I suppose one of the big things at Friends of the Earth we're really conscious of is the opportunity there is on for great strides to be made in employment, in new jobs from the green economy. And it really demonstrates the opportunity of growth there can be to benefit and take things forward that way, which is being held back right now. And everything's being seen as a great cost all the time, without seeing the advantages there could be, in particularly in as like I said in my presentation on high quality green jobs. And these are barriers that are being created that are holding those back.
Louise.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, just thinking about, yeah, this is hard, isn't it? It's like doing a live exam. On the collaboration one, the Dan, your duty to cooperate, yeah. Just thinking about the collaboration piece, super important on adaptation, where we've got the interlinked risks. So we've got the risk of cascading failure, where we would be reliant on utilities or DNOs or on the roads, and data centers and so on. So it's a sort of public, private and regulated industry issue where we've got you're only as good as the sort of the weakest link in there. And that interdependency is the same on mitigation, isn't it? Where I want to do certain things, but I can't because I don't have the grid capacity. And I think that the sort of the role of the regional energy system planner that's coming in is supposed to tackle some of that. So I think that is why everybody who gets any money from the government, I suppose, has got to be under this duty. So the public sector duty would, from Scotland, would seem to me the most sensible, but I've never written a national policy. And as we know, it's easy to criticise it, but then if you sat down and had to write it, that's another thing, isn't it? Good opportunity. And we've got that. So I think we can see those local heat and energy efficiency strategies in Scotland that link those two things and are supposed to enable that, and local area energy planning across every authority in Wales. So there's an enabling action that government can do, but that probably sits outside of what's written in a duty. Just coming on to the breakdown of national targets and the concept of a locally determined contribution, I think it's a useful exercise to look at what each local area can do to get down to their net zero that works for them. But then it can't turn into sort of horse trading whereby I shut a factory down. I shut my cement factory in Shap in Cumbria. That drops my emissions. Or I might move a factory to somewhere else or ship my waste somewhere. So those emissions live somewhere else. They're still national emissions and they're in the basket. So that's kind of my scope 3 is your scope 1 or 2. So we end up, I mean, and that's what we're doing globally. So we could end up in a lot of sort of accounting kind of total nightmare that doesn't actually enable action. So there's some common sense that's got to kind of come through there, and how that works in policy is another matter. So I think that's where frameworks of who is expected to do what, fitting within a regional, perhaps a regional route map that's been worked on by partnerships, is more helpful, so that the electricity distribution network operators or DSOs know what's going to be coming. I mean, and then we touch on the land use framework. So it's super complicated, but it's that kind of, what can we do now? What do we know is going to be happening? And what can we legislate for around a duty that enables action rather than arguing? So, sorry, that was a rather bit of a cop-out answer, I'm afraid, there.
No, all good. So, got a couple more questions. Let me see. So, this is a question that I would also like to know the answer to. Tom Welsh, do we know if the government are already receptive to this as an idea, assuming most respondents are in favour of what's likely to happen next? I think it'll be really interesting to see who does respond to the consultation. I think you're probably right. The majority of respondents are in favour in some sense, but you can't be sure on that. And the government have, have indicated their interest, but not. I wouldn't describe that as being sort of knocking our doors to do this. I think, but I'd be interested what from takes of other people. Talking about from Julian Dean, seeing a comparison with the housing targets, which set out 1.5 million new homes, but without a target within that for social and affordable. The targets for that are elsewhere in the planning framework, but nevertheless, not setting big strategic target without that sort of granular detail. So, but does so should any statutory duty have specific targets which are clearly linked to co-benefits? And then there is a question from Chris Poynton about experience in Cambridgeshire. County Council is working on its local area energy plan and researching locally determined contributions that ladder up to the UK's nationally determined contributions. So how do the panel see these two key initiatives playing into a proposed statutory duty? And then I will take one more question in my list that doesn't have a title, but I'm sure it's from someone. In terms of the critical information gaps to join community, local authority and national climate action, with both strategic settlement top down, reporting bottom up. So how basically how will the statutory duty join up the dots between the different levels of information that are held at a local community level, local authority level, and a national level? Go through those. Who would like to go?
I'll have a go at the first one, Adam, if that's okay. Just engagement with DESNZ and the Treasury. So I think it's been generally thought of, Whitehall orthodoxy, that they wouldn't really want a duty on local government because they'd have to pay for it. I think that recently we've had slightly more enlightened conversations, including with officials in the Treasury, about this, and they're keen to know what they'd get for their what would we get for our money, I think is really the question that they're asking. And so I suppose we would need to be very clear in our discussions around the duty what it is we think we can deliver by when, as a result of the duty and any funding that would come from it.
And I think that's recognized. I think if we ask the question inside DESNZ, you'll get a slightly different answer to the question you will get inside MHCLG, both of which will be different to the answer you may naturally get from the Treasury. And ultimately, as we know, the buck stops with the source of bucks comes from the Treasury. So getting them, at least in a space where they're not actively hostile, is critical to this. Victoria.
Yeah, I want to tackle the same question, but slightly on maybe a different twist. I'm not convinced that political leaders in local government want it, would want a statutory duty either, not all of them anyway, because they've already got, I can recognise their perspective, they've already got enough to deliver that it's statutory, they've got tighter and tighter budgets, and they desperately would need that funding to go alongside any statutory duty. And if the government can't provide that, then I could imagine they would be lobbying quite hard not to be given any more statutory duties. The challenge is that I think our climate and the nature around us won't be able to survive without those requirements, and we are just going to get in a worse and worse position if we don't do it.
Just to pick up, so in our committee, I mean, obviously slightly skewed by the fact it is the housing, but our committee is very broad in terms of it covers housing, planning, local growth, waste, transport, environment and climate. But nevertheless, so obviously it does have people who have an interest in that area. On a cross-party basis, there was unanimity in support of the principle of a statutory duty. Now, the gap between principle and implementation is obviously the key thing. What I would say is, and again, we're obviously seeing with the recent county council elections that position may or may not last at the next iteration of my committee that comes in the autumn once some of our new members join. But nevertheless, I think it's a recognition that if a statutory duty is placed, that comes under the new burdens doctrine with at least a requirement to provide additional resource. And I don't know if we've got the data of how many different or whether Isaac does actually, about how many different councils have got their own climate targets and their own climate emergency action plans. I'm pretty sure that data exists somewhere. And it's the number of them that don't is probably reasonably small, even if some of what people are doing are quite a high level. We've all set that requirement upon ourselves, and therefore having something that balances what does that actually mean? Sort of defining what net zero means for a local authority is actually one of the big challenges that, in terms of residuals and everything else that we're getting to. But then also that comes with a funding requirement. But anyway, sorry, I've dived in there. Louise, was there anything else you want to do about that join up between the local and the local and the national? Anything else?
I mean, I think that join up, that's critical, isn't there? So there's join up needed in terms of whose job it is to do certain things. And you get that when you're working with a combined authority. So you've got the combined authority and say 10 constituents, local authorities. We came up with the target for Greater Manchester Combined Authority based on a Tyndall budget, the fair amount of budget we had left for our emissions, which is different to the way that it was calculated at the national level. And then the local authorities had to, well, they came along, they signed up to it as well. And then you've got that sort of divide between whose job it is to do what. I mean, that works quite well in a combined authority where you've got everybody pulling together and you've got sort of an expert on, you know, Oldham will apply for this and so is an expert on something else over in Rochdale. So you've got a better team working on it. We've never apportioned that down to the local level, as far as I'm aware, sitting at the combined authority level. But I'm just thinking about those. If you apportion the targets down, it'll be very different, as Victoria said, in a rural area which has got higher emissions because of its transport and its types of housing and its land use, than a city area which has got less potential to do other things. And in the Climate Change Committee 7th Carbon Budget and Local Authorities report, which I'm writing at the moment with CAG consultants, we are looking at area archetypes of what different kinds of areas could be focusing on to get at the most emissions they can. So it might be public transport in a combined authority area, but it might be an absolute massive EV chargers and EV car clubs for rural areas where not everyone can afford to buy a fancy EV. So if you add that back up again, though, are you going to be like at the end of your restaurant bill where you've still got 20 quid no one's paid for? That's the biggest danger. But then you want to get on with good enough action, I think, that's which is important. So I think you could get really bogged down there, but I think it's kind of a useful exercise to have a look at it, but you know, fairly roughly, and keep going rather than worrying about it too much. So that's that one. I've forgotten what the other questions were now because I was listening.
That's all right. So I think it was there was more just about yeah, they were both around sort of how the local, obviously the one was around the information gaps with drawing out the dots, and the other one was the role of local energy area plans and locally determined contributions and the link to nationally determined contributions. So
I mean, on local area energy plans, I would say is, and somebody said very wisely in there, I think it was also about climate assemblies in the chat, if you are going to do a plan, or you're going to do a climate assembly or a citizen conversation or something like that, where you've asked for a report or for a study, have your exit strategy from that study in place with an identified budget and your local authority officers or councillor ready for it to land in, so you do stuff with it. So it is not one of those ones that's like, yeah, we've got this plan and we didn't do anything with it because we hadn't thought that far ahead. Because there are quite a few things like that sitting around and have been for years that then go out of date. So I think landing it ready to do is absolutely critical. And in I think some of the work with Innovate UK, we've been doing that. We've been planning impact sessions for what you're going to do with information once you've done citizen engagement. And that involves speaking across all the silos and across all the different departments to say, what's the potential of the findings from this study? What are we going to do with it afterwards? What's our supply chain looking like? Who wants to know this news? Who's going to be hostile to it? I think that's absolutely critical because there are just too many feasibility studies, too many old reports lying around, which we don't then act on. And some consultants, not me, make a lot of money out of that. And that's just wasted. So that focus on the so what when you're planning the what is absolutely critical.
Okay, brilliant. We've got less than 5 minutes now. There's a couple of last questions, but then if people want to give any sort of final thoughts before we wrap up. So from Bethan Huntley, talked around, she said, could similar issues occur like the Active England capability funding where poor performing councils end up receiving less support and fall further behind? And I suppose the question you can ask is that already happening with various things where people have to bid in for resources because those who are actually more on the front foot are there with shovel-ready activities. So I suppose, as with all funding schemes, it's what's the baseline, what's the stretch capacity, and then how does the national level or potentially the regional level, as some talked about, work with the poorest performing members to help raise their game. I suppose that's the active question. And then in response, Peter talked about Eamon's response to earlier about the potential for funding to cap ambition. He says, isn't it possible to create a funding mechanism which enables every local authority area to meet a minimum level of activity, but also incentivizes ambition or penalizes lack of ambition, i.e. early iterations of active travel funding offered every year 100% grant according to needs-based formula, but 100% of grant for ambitious plans and 75% for those lacking ambition. So both of those are very much in the same space. So it's basically, how can we incentivize work with those at the lowest end, and deal with that. So if people want to wrap any answers up with any final comments they want to make, and then we will need to head off into the sunset. Who would like to go first?
I can jump in.
Being polite and holding back. Go Eamon.
I would say that first of all, it's really, really important not to let that gap between those who are at the forefront of this and those who are struggling to get in to widen to too far. We need to find, as you say, some mechanisms by which we're able to narrow that gap as the whole thing moves in a favourable direction, and that needs to be about trying to, for those who are in the forefront of this, it's going to be about sharing what works and what doesn't, because I think for those who are further behind, what they might not have is the capability locally to determine what it is they should do. What are the 4 things they could do? So if there is already a well marked out route for them to take, then that's going to be advantageous to them in their ability to catch up. So there's something for us all to be doing here in terms of improving the flow of information between those who are at the forefront and those who are further behind, to ensure that we're able to get that information flow, enable people to work more effectively with what they've got in terms of the capacity locally.
Thanks, Eamon. Louise.
I'll just build on that, which is to be able to, if you're lagging behind, it's quite possibly because you don't have political leadership and so on, but it might be you don't have the capability or capacity to take up that support on offer. So there's something, we used to have beacon councils where you could learn from other councils, but I think there is a regional role there. We've got the net zero hubs. We have had support from the Energy Saving Trust about the EV charging schemes. We've got the Heat Network Development Unit. So where we have a sort of hive of expertise that could be made available to the local authority, it's important. But I was hearing this morning, if you leave it in the hands of external people or consultants to help with, you don't really ever bring that right into the local authority. So I think things like secondments could be useful in that context. We do hear of a shortage of people when local authorities are trying to recruit as well. So making it a better career is important as well. But I'd say, banks of people or a way to bring those skilled people in, really important. Sorry, got to 4 o'clock.
Thanks, Louise. Victoria.
Yeah, very, very briefly. I think that collaboration and working, and actually where we've got combined authority is brilliant, but actually councils are the same type, working together and learning very much from each other. There's case studies that have been produced by Blueprint and other fantastic tools to learn from and help councils who perhaps are further behind move forward for more rapidly than their peers who are further ahead have done.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much to our amazing panel of Victoria Marsom, Eamon Lally and Louise Marix-Evans. Enormous thanks also to the Blueprint Coalition and to Climate Emergency UK. So thank you, Peter, Sandra and Isaac. Well, that's a really rich discussion, and please do, in case we hadn't already drilled home the point, please do make sure you respond to the LGA's consultation on the statutory duty so that we can get as many really well-informed answers as possible and we can help move this agenda forward. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a lovely rest of your day.